Welcome to the Mr. Beacon podcast. My name's Steve Statler. This week we are featuring an interview with Energist, his Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development, Gianpaolo Marino. He's been on the podcast before, but I invited him back on because Energist have been in the press. They announced a new tag, and that intrigued me. Gianpaolo made what seemed to be some very provocative assertions about how this performed versus other companies' products. But I then figured out that there may be some massaging or hyping by the journalist who did the interview. But anyway, their announcement is interesting. They are a very interesting company generally because they, in my mind, are like a benchmark of the ambient IoT business. They are involved in some very large, important projects. And as they do well, I think we can, use that as a measure of how that very interesting segment of Internet of Things is starting to scale. Their technology really, in my opinion, is best of breed. If you want kind of a high performance bridge gateway, then something that will energize tags from a long distance. And so I wanted to get the latest on that. I find them interesting. I've worked with them for years at Wiliot. We did a project with them around our starter kits. And so they produced the beacons for that and did a really great job, certification and customizing and so forth. And I remember at the time, people were really skeptical about us working with them. They said, "Oh, this company's not going to be around," but they are. They've got incredible resilience, a lot of strong technology, and I think their story is interesting. They started off in this business, focus on a lot of wireless power transfer use cases with items around the house that were going to be powered without plugging in. And now they've really pivoted and focused on a lot of the industrial use cases. And they have absolutely committed to ambient IoT as a category. So they're great proponents of it, very resourceful. So anyway, I think it's an interesting company to stay up to date on. Those of you who are super observant will have noticed that I actually introduced the show using my name, Steve Statler. I don't think I've ever done it before, maybe once in the 9 years I've been doing the podcast. And I decided to do it just because I've been starting to talk a bit more about AmbAI, the company that we spun out of Wiliot. And so it just seems kind of a bit odd being completely anonymous. Previously, as an admirer of writers and podcasters like Garrison Keillor, who had this incredible series called Prairie Home Companion, he never used his name, and I thought that was kind of cool. And I think we just focused too much on the talking heads in news and commentary and so forth. But I also think it's interesting for people to know what's happening to the people that they're listening to. And I have, since Valentine's Day, been focused on this spin out, which we call AmbAI, Ambient Artificial Intelligence. And it's starting to get some attention. We are, I think, going to be featured in the next couple of weeks in Robin Report, which is an industry publication that covers retail. There's an interview that I did with Barry McGough about basically how AI is challenging brands and retailers with arguably their existence. And I won't go into the details of why, but look out for that. Barry is a super interesting guy. He's been on the podcast in the past. I met him when he was at PVH, the parent company for Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger. He's headed up innovation there. He's done innovation work at Google, and he's now at a company called Americo, which is one of these companies that it basically licenses and manufactures products under some large brand names, including Calvin Klein, and he's Group Vice President of Innovation and Strategy there. So Robin Report, Barry McGough, interesting interview that I think does a good job of laying out what the impact AI is going to have on brands and retailers, and it's very significant. So that's a little bit about Ambi. There's an interview that came out on The Spoon, a podcast that Michael Wolff, ex-GigaOM analyst, puts out. His previous guest before me was Mark Cuban, so definitely big shoes to fill, as in the guy that's on Shark Tank and runs Cost Plus Drugs. So we really get into it about this topic of the impact of AI on brands and retailers. So there's a couple of things that are going on. Now let's get back to Gianpaolo and Energist. So Gianpaolo, welcome back to the Mr. Beacon podcast.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here and to share how the market is evolving lately.
Yeah, and things are moving fast. You were last here, I think it was episode 215 in March of this year. Now you're back again. We don't normally have people come back so quickly, but you made, I read an article in Fierce Wireless, I think it was, Fierce something, about your tags and platform. And I've always been a big fan of your company. I think Energist is fascinating to me because I think you have both the first mover advantage and the first mover disadvantage. You know, you're exploring, you've end up investing a lot of capital in certain things, and then you pivot, and of course that uses up that capital. But I've always believed in the core competencies that your company has. You really understand RF, you understand getting products certified, and your hardware is cool. And so I basically want to talk about the new announcements. Want to talk about especially the sensor. I kind of looked on your website, I found the press releases, and I couldn't find much else on there. So I thought, why not ask the man himself on to tell us about it? So do you want to just give us a preview of what you recently announced, the software and sensor hardware?
Yes, absolutely, Steve. Yes. So recently we announced the introduction of our eTag sensor solution, which is in essence is a temperature sensor that basically operates without battery, and again, without any sort of like maintenance, to the battery, harvest energy from our wireless power network, and it's capable of basically providing information related to, again, temperature, but also location, which we provide across basically our bridge-to-bridge communication and triangulation.
Okay. And it's a battery-free Bluetooth sensor, is that right?
It is a battery-free Bluetooth sensor. So we leverage this standard low-power BLE communication or Bluetooth. The caveat is exactly a complete elimination of the battery. It's a sensor that today can reach up to 5 meters. We obviously are going to be working towards improving further, that range more and more. But we believe that 5 meters could be good enough, to really start scaling in some specific application that we have what we have come across probably over the last 2 years, where, there's always a need, for sensors that are operating, again, in essence, without batteries.
Now, in the article that I read, it was positioned competitively with what Wiliot offers. They have battery-free sensors. You have a battery-free sensor. And I don't know if you could say anything about that.
Yeah, I think in the article, to be honest, it was positioned as a competitive solution to Wiliot. I don't think that is the case. I think on the other hand, it's a complement, to the Wiliot solution, because again, our sensor and Wiliot solution are very different. Wiliot is a sort of like a Bluetooth sensor or low power Bluetooth sensor that can be applied on every asset. Our sensors cannot. There is obviously a cost difference between the two. But again, our sensor is something that could provide, that control unit that sometimes, customers are looking for to measure against the Williot. Let's say you have a pallet where you have a bunch of boxes that you're basically monitoring with Williot solutions. Sometimes in a pallet you want to have a control units that maybe has a little bit more of a much more improved or much more accurate, sensor solution where you can actually measure standard deviation of Williot, towards, that control unit. But I don't think it's something that will compete against Williot. Again, there is a price difference between the two solutions. And our goal is not to replace Williot. Actually, our goal is to actually work and to enhance further, Williot solution.
Okay. And, Williot often talks about capturing ground truth and, having reference tags and so forth. So it sounds like this may potentially fulfill that role. You said there's a price difference. What sort of order of magnitude are we talking about? What's the budgetary pricing for this sensor?
I would say the budgetary price for the sensor is around $5.
Okay.
And so, as you know, I mean, we are very familiar with, Williot is that. So there's a tremendous price delta between the two. But you actually mentioned a very important point, Steve. As we have done a lot of work, with Williot, oftentimes, we run across sensors that are battery powered or sensors that, have some sort of DC power. And so the goal is to basically eliminate these sensors, for our customers and to leverage what we're building on the network side, right? To create basically sensors that can operate batteryless, right? So we kind of want to, help customers reduce, their total cost of ownership with an infrastructure that is taking place. And so, that infrastructure can enable, these battery-enabled sensors that are still used in a lot of the operation, to basically be replaced with Energist tag solution.
Okay. So that's the real competition. What is the difference? Why not just have another Williot tag that's measuring temperature versus this higher cost solution? What are the advantages that the product has? Is eSense, is that right? That's the product.
It's an eSense. Yes,
Yeah.
we'll call it the eSense. Yes, I think the advantage, as I mentioned, the temperature sensor that we have on our sensor device, our sensor solution, it's a bit more accurate than the Williot one, right?
Okay.
And I think that accuracy provides for some sort of control unit that a lot of customers want to have when deploying, for instance, in a cold chain application, right? You really need to understand exactly, to plus or minus 1% of deviation where your temperature is in a specific area, right? And so, the tendency is always to have a control unit that has a little bit more accuracy on the sensor side. And that's what basically we do. And that control units works very well with Williot because then, hey, the temperature is 25 degrees. And I am within plus or minus 5% based on what Williot is reporting. And great, fantastic, right? I can tolerate, that standard of deviation.
Okay. And what is it that makes it more accurate?
It's a dedicated sensor that we have on board, right? I mean, we have a dedicated temperature sensor on board. It's not something that we do at Energist. We buy an off-the-shelf, temperature sensor that we determined to be very accurate. Now, the caveat is also that we're not bounded to just temperature. We can add a proximity sensor. We can add a light sensor as future product that we're thinking to introduce to the market. We can add a security sensor, right? So there is definitely, I would say, a family of new products that are going to be based on the e-tags, which will have different sensor capabilities.
Okay. And it's something that you control. So for people that want kind of more of a one-stop shop, then I guess it has that.
That's correct.
Advantage too. And can you go into a little more technical detail? So it sounds like it's multiple chips. You've got a sensor chip and a transponder of some kind. Is that... Is the energy harvesting? Are you using backscatter or?
I wish we could leverage backscattering technology for energy. Well, I think let me put it this way. The sensor, the topology of the eSense tags, it basically comprises of an harvesting antenna that we have on the receiving ends, and then there is a rectifier, right, which basically rectifies that voltage and current, and then feeds that into basically a standard Bluetooth chip. And then obviously feeds that into a sensor device, to keep it enabled, right? So in a very high level, this is what the topology of the eSense tag looks like.
Okay. And so there's a capacitor of some kind?
Yes, there is a capacitor that enables us to basically, operation when, the sensor is outside the line of sight of the wireless power network. right? So obviously the cap basically turns on, and has enough energy that is stored on the cap to basically keep the sensor on up to a certain time, which we are in the process of right now qualifying and testing. But yes, in essence, the cap really functions to ensure that the sensor still operates when it's not within the line of sight of the network.
And that is one of the variables in energy harvesting. It's, I harvest the energy, I may be in a position to harvest energy, but then how much energy do I harvest? How long do I keep it? And so it sounds like you're not ready to share those parameters yet. Is there anything that you can say on how long you retain the energy for? Because that's a design factor if you're thinking about which products to use where.
Yes, absolutely, Steve. Yeah, I mean, we kind of want to be able to, ideally retain the energies at least up to like a couple hours,
Okay.
where the sensor is outside, the line of sight of the transmitter. That's basically the goal. So, and again, we are in the process of characterizing that, ensuring that we use the right capacitor, the right size capacitor. Maybe we're testing caps, but we're also testing super caps, because obviously there is a quantifiable difference between the two, just to assess what sort of energy harvesting reservoir we're able to leverage when again the sensor is not operating within the wireless power network solution.
Okay. Well, that's good. Certainly in my mind, that clears things up. As a keen watcher of both what you're doing and what Wiliot's doing, and knowing that you work closely with them, then that's makes a lot more sense than what I was reading before. It sounds like you've also got a software platform there. Is there anything more you can tell us about that?
Yes, so we've also built what we call our eCompass platform, which is a software platform that enables basically customers with an easy interface to monitor basically asset over which the sensor is applied to, right? So we have sort of alerts, that could be temperature alerts, could be location alerts. We basically, through our wireless power network, we are able to basically delineate zones, and so within the zones, we can basically track how assets are moving across a certain customer operation. So in essence, the platform provides a sort of interface of everything that the wireless power network and the eSense tag can offer, right? And it's something that customer can use, or customer cannot use. We'll leave that up to them. If they just want the raw data, and they can do whatever they want with it. But if they want an interface that is easy to use and very intuitive, then eCompass will work very well.
And is this something where you've partnered with another company, or you're writing it from scratch?
No, this is something that we have developed from scratch. This is an effort that has been ongoing at Energist for probably a year, and yeah, we have taken really the right step to really build the cloud, to a level where now we can sort of like have a complete solution, right? You have a transmitter technology, you have a receiving technology, and then you have a cloud platform on top that basically provides the sort of information that customers are looking for.
And with eCompass, is that something that you have to use if you want to use the eSense tag? Do they come as kind of, are they inextricably bound?
No, not necessarily, Steve. I think eCompass, it's not bounded to be used exclusively with our eSense tags. I mean, like as I mentioned, customers can take the raw data from the eSense tag, and they can run that data through their cloud and use their interface. But there are some customers out there, typically the medium to small customers, that they might like to have that sort of interface right off the bat, because again, maybe they don't have a developed cloud, or maybe they kind of want to see how the solution works before they commit into like a large scale deployment.
And so it sounds like the eSense tag will work with the eCompass platform, but you can use the eSense tag with someone else's platform. Can you use the eCompass platform with someone else's tags?
I think it's a great question, and I don't think we have an answer to that yet.
Okay. All right.
But I think, considering where the market is going, there's I've seen a lot of development into, especially on the tag side, tags being able to operate, without batteries. There's a few companies, even in Europe. I think there was an announcement not too long ago from Paragon ID, where they developed two tags, one that will harvest energy off of PV, another one that will harvest energy off of RF. So we are not against, using eCompass for other tags. We're just not quite there yet, but eventually this will be a good problem to have.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It's a good business model. And I know a lot of people have resistance to, another mouth to feed and more vendors in the stack. But these platforms are actually something that save people time and money. And certainly in terms of generating predictable revenue, it's good for the valuation of the company. And on that note, I saw that your stock price has been going up. So congratulations on that. It seems like you had record revenues. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on what's driving that.
Yeah, no, this is we're super obviously excited. I think Energist is really entering a new phase. I think the company, after pivoting the company 3 years ago, and I'm sure you know the story, Steve. You've been through it, since the beginning. I think right now we're starting to see product market fit. We're starting to see traction. We're starting to see revenue growth. We're super excited on what's ahead of us. We definitely see quarters of sequential growth from a revenue standpoint. But I think what also we're excited is we are also cutting costs and making sure that the company runs very efficiently, also from a cost standpoint, because it all adds to the profitability of the company, and then ultimately it will help the stock price. So we are obviously being engaged with a couple of big customers, Fortune 10 customers, in some interesting development, and we're gearing up for major scale deployment. So this is exciting. Obviously I can't mention who those customers are, but I think that we are entering an exciting phase, not just for Energist, but just for Ambient IoT as a whole.
I agree. And I'd be interested to hear a bit more on what the use cases are that you see as being the tip of the spear for that growth in ambient IoT.
Absolutely. I believe cold chain application is definitely a use case, or that will drive tremendous growth for many different reasons. I think ambient IoT is what I always like to think about. Ambient IoT turns the light on onto supply chain, right? It's like, okay, well, with RFID, I'm maybe shining a little bit of a light. With ambient IoT, I'm turning the light on completely, right? And so this is critical, especially in cold chain application, because the problem is always happening when the light is off, right? The problem is always arise, in the dark spot where you don't have visibility of what the asset is doing, or where the asset, whether or not the asset is stored at a proper temperature. And I think I see this as a use case that is going to be growing tremendously. Why? Because basically we are saving customers millions of dollars of food waste, right? And so there is definitely like a need, a major pain point, to go and address. And I think that the ambient IoT addresses that very, very, very well. Asset tracking, for instance, for transportation and logistics, is another area that I think is growing tremendously, where ambient IoT will be able to really, provide excellence. Manufacturing, eventually even medical, will be something that will tag on. So for now, if I had to go back, to your original question, yeah, cold chain application, transportation and logistics for asset tracking. This is really the two market that are in application that are pulling ambient IoT, but eventually it will develop into much more.
I agree. And that reducing waste is great because you're saving money. You're helping the environment, you're improving the quality of the product, you're improving the shelf life, not just in the store, but at home. And so that makes customers happier. It reduces customer churn because they're not annoyed that they just bought something that suddenly went bad. There's so many benefits to it. So it's good to hear that you're seeing this momentum. Where are the dark spots? I love this metaphor of turning the lights on. I've used it a lot myself, but I think for people that are not familiar with the use cases, it's hard for them to visualize. You assume Okay, maybe there's the odd mishandling event, but where are the problems specifically? What's happening in the dark, and where's it happening, and why is it happening?
That's a great question. So I think, today we're very familiar with RFID. I will say for 90% of the RFID technology is a passive technology, which means that you're going to have to provide some sort of excitation signal, to get an answer, right? But once that excitation signal is gone, once you're not scanning, then you don't know what is happening to those assets. And so as assets are moving across, let's say, retail IoT application, as assets are moving across in staging areas, pre-staging areas, loading areas, right? you know, the inability to understand the control environment of the asset creates problems. And so maybe a pallet of of food, it's waiting, to be loaded on a trailer and has been sitting there for way too long, outside of certain temperature boundaries where now, might spoil the entire pallet. Well, this is when problems happen. And so, the ability of detect that before these problems are even happening, the ability to basically say, hey, this pallet is sitting here at 30 degrees Celsius, and then, this could create a problem if it stays here for another 30 minutes. So you need to send someone, to basically change the environment or to load, this pallet onto a much more controlled environment in a trailer where, the temperature might be within safe operation. So hopefully I made, good analogies for you where the problem happened, right? So does RFID enable you to do that? No, no, because you just can't. It's impossible to have people on the floor scanning continuously assets, right? And so does ambient IoT provides that level of visibility that enables then, these problems to be solved? Yes, because again, a technology like Williot, for instance, it's always on. And it's always providing you a piece of information that might be relevant, for, to run an efficient operation. Let me put it this way.
Yeah, and with your infrastructure, you can afford to basically have much more of the shop floor, the back of store, the loading dock continuously covered. You're not waiting for someone to do something. You're not restricted to just choke points to make the readings. And it's so funny when you have these use cases in your mind, and then you go about your normal life as a civilian. It is so rather than someone who's in the business who's kind of deploying the technology or designing it. It's amazing how often you see problems like this that could be fixed with the use of the technology. I was flying to Amsterdam for the AIPIA Smart Packaging Conference, and I went through one of the airports where there was a QSR, quick service restaurant. It's a very large international coffee chain, and they sell sandwiches and wraps and that sort of thing. And they had a stack of cases of these products that they obviously couldn't fit in the back of the store, and they couldn't fit it in the cooler. And so this stack was literally up to my chin, and it was sitting in ambient temperature. And I'm like looking at it, and these are like ham sandwiches and chicken sandwiches. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe. And this isn't even hidden. It's in front of customers. And I'm like, oh, the customers are looking at each other.
Yes.
But, the staff are super busy. They don't have time. And so they're just kind of trying to do their best. But, someone somewhere needs to know that there's this issue, and it needs to be a systematic, programmatic. And, that's just one incident that's happening in the front of the store. Goodness knows what's happening in the back of the store.
I mean, I think I was reading a report maybe 6 months ago that there is about $50 billion worth of food are getting wasted every year. And the question is, can we put, some of this money back, to the consumer so that they don't have to pay for it? Because ultimately we pay for it. This inefficiency of on cold chain and supply chain that causes this food waste, it basically reflects back onto the consumer, where he basically has to pay a higher price. So can we save maybe 25 billion and enable, consumer like us to afford, food at a much better control environment and much better cost? I think Ambient IoT can take us there.
Yeah, it's a win-win-win for the consumer, for the manufacturers, for the retailers. No one really gains much by food being wasted like that. Tell me a bit more about the second use case that you were talking about. So this is tracking reusables. Where are you seeing that being adopted, and what are the business benefits?
Yes, we have been talking to a lot of customers probably over the last 6 months. And where do we see, customers that are primarily like in the manufacturing sectors, could be tobacco customers, steel manufacturing customers, glass manufacturing customers, where there is really the need, to have a much more clear picture on their operation to really trace, how those assets are moving, across their warehouses, their operation, right? And so there is also a need though to repurpose sometimes some of those tracking devices, right? Because as an asset is going from you know beginning of life to end of life, meaning it's ready to be packaged and delivered to the store. Now that tracking device can be repurposed back for a new asset which will basically go through the same journey, right? And so yeah, I think we've had some really interesting discussion with some very 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 good customers here in the United States, again in the manufacturing sector, where something like that is of tremendous interest.
Very good. Well, Gianpaolo, anything else we should cover before we wrap up? I wanted to get you on for this update because you had the new product and you were showing some nice progress on the financials. Any last words?
No, I think my last word is really this is exciting. I think there is a tremendous inflection point in the market right now where ambient IoT is really taking off. It's exciting to see what Wiliot has done, especially with standard Bluetooth communication. But it's also exciting to see what is happening also on the backscattering side of things. There are some interesting companies that are claiming, backscattering technology, are claiming, ultra low power communication. And I think, once that goes into a sort of like a mature solution, this will help even more ambient IoT, right? Because, the need for a ultra low power communication needs to be there so that, we can start processing a lot of more data. So it's exciting to see.
It is exciting. And of course, with any of these technologies, people end up having arguments about what certain terms mean. And I think it's kind of interesting when you picked on alternative methods for transmitting signals and harvesting energy. You were talking about backscatter and so forth. And I was in a debate with some friends about, so what is ambient IoT? And I've got my definition, but I want to give you first crack at it. Do you want to give how would you define ambient IoT if someone's saying, okay, what is this thing?
I mean, the way I look and I envision ambient IoT is the ability for an IoT node, and I'm not going to describe what that is, but,
Mhm.
to basically harvest energy from its surrounding. And that energy is good enough for that IoT node, to basically collect data and transmit data into the cloud. That's my definition of ambient IoT.
I think it's a good definition. My definition is slightly broader, but I would concede that there are also valid narrow definitions. You just gave one, which is a good one. If we look at 3GPP, the people that are defining the future of cellular standards, they were really the ones that, for me, took and applied this marvelous descriptor, ambient, to this Internet of Things space. And so 3GPP, Ambient IoT, is kind of like its own world. And there's a set of standards, and they're using actually multiple technologies under that umbrella. So even if you say, well, forget about the Bluetooth, forget about all the other technologies, I'm just concerned with the cellular definition. And even that it looks like it's going to have a mixture of active tags and backscatter tags. So backscatter tags are where it's like the person on a desert island where they've got the mirror and they're reflecting the sun back to the aeroplane to try and bounce a signal back. And it's a great technology, and it's the basis of UHF RFID, and it seems like that's going to be in the ambient IoT that 3GPP will have. But they'll also have an active radio, which is what Wiliot is, and it's harvesting energy over time. And that's how you can take a weak signal that comes in and you store up the energy and it accumulates in like this bucket, and then eventually it broadcasts out actually a stronger signal. So weak in, strong out. That's revolutionary. And that it looks like that mode will also be supported by 3GPP ambient IoT. But in my mind, the exciting thing about ambient is much broader, and ambient means surrounding us, all around us. And what I see it as being is a progression of the early forms of RFID, radio frequency identification, which were kind of expensive and they required specialized hardware and all this limited visibility that we just described. And to me, ambient IoT is around using these low-cost technologies, commodity radios that are now starting to be produced in their billions. When RFID was first introduced, RAIN RFID is decades old, and so it was designed specifically for this purpose, and the technology was kind of expensive and specialized and relatively low volume. Whereas like Bluetooth, there are billions of Bluetooth chips. So, the cost of that technology is just really low. And so what does it mean? Well, it means that the radios can be everywhere. And the things that attract go from being just the expensive things, the Internet of expensive things, to the things that surround us, the food, the medicine, the clothing, the parts. And so the important bit of ambient to me is the nature of the things being tracked, which are all the things that surround us, rather than just tracking a car or a shipping container. And it's using the economies of scale and the radio technologies that surround us. And in some cases, it'll be an existing radio that's in a smart speaker or in a phone. But in many cases, it'll be like your product. You're piggybacking on very high volume components that have been produced for other things. And so you've cut the cost of the specialist readers. So I don't think ambient IoT is really about, is it backscatter or is it some sort of low-level characteristic? In my book, actually, I think a low-cost printed battery tag can be described as ambient if it's so low cost that it can go on anything. And when it broadcasts, you can use your phone and all of these radios that now surround us to get a picture of everything, everywhere, all at once. And it's that everything, everywhere, all at once. It's the ability to connect every single thing to the cloud that makes ambient IoT really transformative. And, I think when we first started this journey, certainly when I first started working at Wiliot in 2000 and, oh my God, goodness, 17, whenever it was, the vision was, well, the phone will be the only device that you need. And that's, maybe that will be the case eventually. And I think more and more the phone will play a bigger role. But in my mind, it's all about reducing the cost, increasing the visibility, taking the labor out of it, and this ability to just have continuous visibility of all the things that are ambient that surround us. So that's my little soapbox monologue on ambient IoT.
It's a great. I think it's a great description, Steve, and I could not agree more with that.
Very good. But of course, we're going to need very high performance readers that can make amazing things happen, especially in trailers and distribution centers. And I think that's where Energist does a great job. So normally we have this sort of warm up thing where I ask for 3 songs that have meaning for you. And last time you were on, I think you had Volare and a couple of others. Any new songs that you've been listening to recently, Gianpaolo?
No, I think I still stick with my three songs,
Okay.
Steve. It's hard, to replace those, to be honest with you.
Well, in my case, they're just constantly changing, but I do tend to go back to kind of some of the old favorites when pressed. So how have you been doing? You're traveling the world, it seems. Have you been anywhere nice?
Yeah, I think last time I was outside of the US, I was in Italy,
Very nice.
and I was there for work. So I enjoy when I get to go back to my home country and do some work, not just for vacation.
That's awesome. Whereabouts in Italy were you?
So I was in Piacenza, which is basically a couple hours south from Milan.
Oh,
And yeah, so I was pretty much like in the northern region of Italy, in the Lombardia region, basically.
yeah, that's generally where I've been. I went on a work trip to, oh gosh, it's very near Venice anyway. It's where a famous eyewear manufacturer are located, just
Oh,
next to some beautiful mountains and everything. And some of my favorite places in Italy include, well, Lake Como, of course. I know George Clooney likes it too, but I remember staying in an incredibly expensive hotel there with the most fabulous view. And Milan, when I was there last for business, I think we were visiting Fiat. I got to go to their original headquarters that has the racetrack on the roof of the building. It was absolutely stunning. I don't know if you're familiar with that building, but
No, I know exactly the one you're talking about. It's quite amazing, isn't it?
it is. Anyway, I could go spend a long time talking about how much I like Italy, and it's obviously a special place for you. Well, Gianpaolo, that's the end of our chit chat, the end of the podcast. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for inviting me.
So that's Gianpaolo. I think good to keep up to date with what they're doing at Energist. I couldn't get him to talk about his music choices. He's been on so many times. That well is dry. But I am going to tell you what I've been listening to over the last week, which is this album, which is, my goodness, late 70s, Michael Jackson, Off the Wall. I stumbled across an interview with Spike Lee, the amazing film director of Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X. But he made two documentaries on Michael Jackson, one about the Off the Wall album, the making of and what led up to it, and another one about Bad. And any of you that are into pop history, pop culture, this is incredibly interesting. And you get to see things like Sheryl Crow as a backup singer to Michael Jackson on the Bad tour with an amazing hairdo. Kanye West is also one of the people talking in this documentary about Bad, and he's lucid and not at all weird. So a real rush back to memory lane. So that's it. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Aaron Hammock for doing the editing and the publishing of this podcast. I look forward to rejoining you in 2 weeks' time when we have our next interview coming up. And I think you'll find that one interesting too. Until then, be safe and enjoy the journey. Thanks for watching this episode of the Mr. Beacon Ambient IoT podcast. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like and share this video and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss further episodes. For more information about Bleakon, head over to bleakon.net. For more information about Identiv, go to identiv.com. And for more information about AmbAI, go to ambai.ai.